Welcome back, everybody, to Podcasting for Small Business, or the companion podcast, seemingly still unnamed companion podcast to the book Podcasting for Small Business, the essential blueprint to launch your podcast. I'm Ray Sidney Smith, and I'm joined here, of course, by my co-host and co-author, Steve Orr. Steve, how are you doing?
Ray, as always, a pleasure to be here. Maybe we should put the name out to listeners, or maybe they'll come up with a better name or a name in general. Maybe that's who should be doing it. Anyway, we have a special guest today. He's a podpreneur. He's the co-founder of Custom Podcast Solutions. By the way, Custom Podcast Solutions runs Sweet Recording Studio in South Jersey. He's the inventor of Contap, downloadmypodcast.com, and more. He's a very busy guy, but we got him for an hour today. Matthew Passy, thank you for joining us.
It is a pleasure to be here. Great to see you, Steve. Pleasure to meet you, Ray.
Fantastic. Great to have you here, Matthew. And so today we are going to be discussing, we're almost 50%, maybe a little bit more than 50% of the way through. We're at the end of part 2 of the book now, if you can believe that. But here we're talking about chapter 7, and this is really all about getting equipped, and why we thought Matthew would be a really great person to join us for this discussion. But of course, choosing podcasting equipment can feel overwhelming. I know it's not necessarily overwhelming for me because I've been doing it a while, but if you are new to podcasting, it can feel overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be. And so we're going to be talking through what is really necessary. No massive budget, no fancy studio, just gear that works. And so let's talk today about what and how to choose that podcast equipment. Let's talk about some of the typical challenges people experience in terms of just sound and setup. And then we'll talk about some ways to improve audio quality so that your recording environment is, good, so that the audio quality is coming out competent for you as a small business podcaster. So let's get started. Steve, I'm going to lead you into where do you want to start in terms of the concept of podcasting equipment?
So in our book, we break it down between the beginner, intermediate, and advanced podcaster. So if you're a beginner, and I'm going to bring Matthew into this in a moment, we say in the book very simply, you really don't need a lot of stuff. You need a microphone. You need a microphone that you can plug into your computer. So that's really one of the first things that you need. And you need some software, editing software, that you can record and edit your podcast. So Matthew, what you work with, and you have worked with a variety of different folks, what is the biggest challenge for you when you talk to those folks about the equipment that they need to get started?
The truth is, the biggest thing that we usually have to overcome is expectations. Like you said, we're talking with folks who probably don't have a very big budget, who are probably not very knowledgeable in the space, who are just getting started, and it can feel extremely overwhelming. But regardless of how overwhelming the choices can be, most people, when they get started, they come at you and they're like, and I want to sound like a professional. I want to sound and look like NPR, Joe Rogan, then right, like the list goes on of the people that they want to sound like. And what many people don't realize is, to sound and look like a Joe Rogan, or to sound like NPR podcast, or, Golden Globe winner Amy Poehler, that requires a ton of money and a ton of investment. And for the most part, money and investment that you don't need to make, because it is possible to get started in podcasting, to start creating content very, very inexpensively and have it sound pretty good. And I would challenge you that you can even be, like pre-beginner. There are people who are like, I'm thinking about doing a podcast, or businesses are saying to themselves, we should have a podcast. And I would say, before you even go out there and buy anything, take the device that everybody has in their pocket, right? Everyone's got one of these smartphones. Take this device. They've all got a built-in microphone. They've all got a built-in voice recorder or built-in video camera. Plop that down and start talking. First and foremost, find out if you even are comfortable recording when the on-air mic goes on. Because a lot of people think, yeah, I can do a podcast. I talk to my buddies all the time. We're hilarious, or we're so smart, or blah, blah, blah. And then the mic goes on. All you get is, yeah. Uh-huh. No, I agree. Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah. And you quickly find out maybe I'm not built for this. So before you even invest a dime, right? Start with your smartphone. Put it down, hit record, right? You can all sit around and just record. You're probably not going to broadcast this. You're not going to publish it. Maybe you save it in an archive, and in a year or 2 years from now, you can whip it out as part of the blooper reels, or the pilot episode kind of content, have some fun with it. But just start recording, right? Just get comfortable talking and recording yourself. And importantly, listen to it. Most people are shocked to discover what they sound like when it is played back through speakers. And so, just start with that. But to your question, getting started, basic equipment, yes. Having a microphone will give you a dramatic improvement in quality. Right? A lot of people, they say they're going to start a podcast, and maybe they just open up their computer, they start hitting record, they're relying on the built-in speaker mic that's in their laptop, or maybe even the mic that's built into their web camera. And, they sound like a kid recording in their mom's basement. And that's okay if you are a kid recording in your mom's basement. If this is something you are doing for fun, right? If this is just really just testing it out and experimenting, blah, blah, cool, go for it. Sound like that, right? Enjoy yourselves. But if you're doing this as a business, if you're doing this on behalf of your brand, you have to have a minimum level of quality and expectation, because whatever you publish out there is going to reflect on how people perceive your brand. And so, if you are a, $10 million AR financial, person, right? Or a big time accountant, and you're trying to get people to sign these 5, 6, 7-figure contracts, you don't want to sound like you're podcasting from your mom's basement. And so start simple, right? The mic, Steve, I believe you have, is the ATR, the Samsung Q2U.
Actually, I have the Samsung Q2U, which I have a much more expensive mic that is in my closet where I do my real recording.
Okay.
When I do voiceover work and the like. But it's less than $100. This mic that I'm using for this, in part, so I can kind of demonstrate that you don't need to spend $8,000 just to sound. You can sound just as good with a mic that's less than $100.
Right. You take that talking into the laptop speaker, or everybody's sitting around an iPhone recording, or any other number of situations that are possible. And you bring in this, anywhere between $60 and $100 microphone, depending on when you catch it on Amazon. And it takes your quality from like a 2 or a 3 well up to about a 7 or an 8, especially if you know how to use it and you're able to record in a quiet environment. And
we'll get to that, by the way.
Yeah.
We're gonna talk a little bit more about that.
But the great thing about that mic is, one, it's inexpensive. It is easy to use because it is just USB, right? Connect the back of the cable, connect the mic to the back of the mic, and connect that cable to your computer. You're good to go. I used to keep that mic in my laptop bag all the time. And if I was traveling and had to record an episode, I'd just pull it out, plug it in, and good to go. What's great about it, though, is it has a built-in headphone jack. So a lot of people think the microphone is important when recording. Honestly, having earbuds is equally, if not more important, because then you avoid having sound coming out of your speakers feeding back into the mic and creating all sorts of other issues. But so this microphone has the USB port, has the headphone jack. And if you do get better, if you do graduate, if you grow your podcast and you go, all right, we're going to do 2, 3 people around the table. Now we got to start talking about more equipment, which we'll get into. It also has the XLR connection. So it's ready to expand and grow with you. And, it's probably one of the single best pieces of technology to happen to podcasting, is this less than $100 microphone that can really get you sounding very, very amateurish to sounding quite professional. Are you going to sound like NPR? Not quite.
No,
but most people aren't going to hear the difference anyway. Yeah, a few audiophiles are going to go, hey, you're never going to please those people anyway. So get the $80 microphone and just start working with that.
And I
And I would
noticed, I was going to say one other real quick thing. I noticed, again, that I'm using the less than $100 microphone. Matthew is using the microphone that I use for my voiceover work, an Electro Voice RE20, which is an industry standard in broadcasting at radio stations around the country. And I'll shut up and let Ray speak. But I just wanted to mention that we are have been both being radio veterans. We know that microphone.
Very well.
I have lots of different microphones, and the one I've currently been playing around with is this Shure MV7 Plus
Love it.
that I recently. Yeah, it's a fantastic microphone, and again, pretty affordable. It works. I've had a wide variety. The Audio Technica, one of the ATs. Fantastic.
AT2100, yeah, AT2020, the AT2100, lots of good.
Yeah.
Sure, and the Shure MV7, by the way, is a great mic. It's a little bit more expensive than the Samsung Q2U, probably slightly higher quality, right? You're going from like that 7-8 level to more like 7.5, 8.5 level. But also now you got the aesthetics. So Shure makes the famous SM7B. That's the microphone that everybody wants to use because famous podcasters always have it. And with the Shure MV7, it's not quite the same, but you start to get that pleasing aesthetic that you get with the 7B, but without spending a few $100s. It's great.
Yeah, I've really liked it. It's got a bunch of tools and bells and whistles that I don't need because I've got an interface and I've got other equipment that I'm working with. But having the XLR and USB-C capabilities to just plug directly into your laptop if you wanted to, and if you don't have an interface, it does allow for expansion to adding another microphone if you want to. So lots of really good stuff there. But what I was going to say is that I have been a huge advocate for using the equipment you have, in many ways. I think the one thing that separates that from business is actually what you said, Matthew, which is that once you are trying to represent your brand, you need to be able to step it up a level, at least to the effect of getting a microphone and cleaning up your audio environment, which we'll get to in a bit. But the one thing that I did want to kind of underscore, which is not something that we talk about in the book, is that you don't want to overplay your cards, right? So if you are a particular business and you're going to try and manifest yourself as being overly professional in podcasting when your business isn't overly professional, match your business to what you're doing. Right. So don't put on a suit and show up in a recording studio environment that looks like you just stepped onto the set of USA Today if that's not going to match your business, right? And while we're focused on audio, we still have this video component here. It'd be really weird if we were all dressed up like we were CNN reporters doing a podcast about podcasting for small business. It's just weird, and I see people trying to do that. I see people trying to do the NPR style podcasting in a business context. It takes a lot of time and energy. You don't get it right. There's an uncanny valley almost feel to it when you try and fail, and it just don't do it. So if you're going to do it, hire the right people to make that work, but don't try and do that. Have a podcast that works for your brand. If you're a Harley Davidson dealership, right, do a podcast that matches that, right? And that's going to include the way in which you deliver the podcast and the equipment that you're using. I wouldn't mind hearing Harley Davidson revving in the background occasionally on a podcast that was about motorcycles, right? That would not be the case if it was about, a dog rescue, right? I would expect, maybe some dog sounds in the background for a dog rescue. So be mindful of how you're choosing your equipment and branding yourself to be appropriate to the podcast.
And I wanted to bring up something you mentioned, the natural sounds. We do talk about that in the book, that it can enhance the listenability of your show. Don't be afraid to have that natural sound in the background. Don't be afraid. We do talk about different places where you can record, and we can get to some of that as well in this episode. But don't be afraid to go live. And let's say you're a veterinarian and you want to go live at a dog shelter and have a conversation with somebody at a dog shelter. Don't be afraid to have some of the sound, the natural sound of dogs barking in the background.
I think that's a great point you make, and it brings up another key piece of information. So I agree. A lot of people, they're in a studio. It is extremely sterile. It is quiet, and it works for a lot of reasons, right? Because it sounds professional, it sounds clean. There's not a lot of distractions. But you're right. There are times like I've done a lot of podcasting from conventions and from like the big halls where they're exhibiting stuff at a conference, and everyone's sort of, oh, but there's so much like you want that noise, right? You want it to sound live. You want it to sound like there are people around you. And yeah, maybe a revving Harley, might be a scotch loud if it's happening within 3 feet of said microphone. But right, if you're in one room and the garage is a couple of rooms over, and we hear it in the background, it's like, yeah, I expect to hear that. You're working on motorcycles all the time. It makes sense. But it does raise a good point about microphones. So listen, the Samsung Q2U is a great microphone. It's a very popular one. But if you aren't going to get that one, and that's okay, it does make sense. Like when you are looking at microphones, especially when you were starting out, make sure you're looking at dynamic microphones versus a condenser microphone. And I'm going to explain in a way that audiophiles and audio engineers are going to rip their hair out and scream at me, but it's a way that makes sense for the lay people, which is a condenser microphone is almost like sonar. It is out there actively looking for sound, right? It's reaching into the void and being like, what is out there? Give me some sound. I used to have a great condenser microphone. I spent a pretty penny on it, and it was so good. I was in a third floor apartment, and I'm recording, and you can hear like squirrels fighting on the ground, over a nut while I'm trying to record. It was too good. And so a condenser microphone is going to sound good, but if you're not soundproofed or sound treated or know how to use it, it's going to sound pretty bad. A dynamic microphone, really, you have to push the sound into it. You have to get real close to it. And why that's so good is because in a situation like, recording at, say, a kennel, right? An office in the kennel, but at a kennel nonetheless, or, at the dealership of a Harley Davidson or on the floor of a convention center or whatnot, a dynamic microphone is going to really focus in on the sound that's coming into it and just pick up a faint sound of what's going on in the background. I'm not sure if right now you can hear, but I have a dog barking at whatever outside. I hear it, but I don't think my microphone is picking it up because it's a good dynamic microphone and because I get really, really close to it. So I get close to it. I adjust my levels to capture my voice and nothing else. And so, yeah, if it picks up a little bit of ambiance when I'm out and about, cool. It's still getting my voice in focus. Whereas if it's a condenser and we're all standing around, it's going to grab everything and sound's going to get muddied and distracted, and it's going to be hard to clean up. So even if you don't go with a Q2U or MV7 or RE20, make sure when you're picking mics, make sure you're finding a dynamic. It will save you a lot of headache in the future.
And we do, by the way, make that recommendation in the book. And I think the easiest way, and your description is interesting as well. I think the easiest thing is to say is that a dynamic microphone is just basically less sensitive than a condenser microphone. And it doesn't, again, pick up those noises that you hear. And it was a choice that our fictional podcasters in the book, Beth and Monique, had to make as well. And they went with dynamic because they listen to us, Ray, right?
Absolutely, Steve. Absolutely. So the goal here for everyone is to really figure out also the equipment that you're recording into and the software you're using around it. So, for example, if you're using a technology that does noise cancellation or any kind of voice isolation, if you're using something like Riverside.fm, if you're in Zoom or Microsoft Teams, they have all kinds of sound conditioning that the software does on top of the microphone. So be mindful of the fact that once you plug your microphone into whatever hardware and then using whatever software, there may be other things manipulating the sound. And most often than not, you want to get as close to the raw audio as possible. But sometimes that's not necessarily the case or the necessity. So it just depends on the circumstance.
I think that, by the way, raises another good point about headphones. Zoom in particular does what they call echo cancellation. So if you're using your microphone and you're not wearing headphones, right, Steve and Ray could be coming out of my computer speakers. And if they're coming out of my computer speakers, my mic can hear them. So what Zoom does, what echo cancellation does, is it says, oh, okay, Ray and Steve are talking. I'm going to basically mute Matthew's microphone so that I'm not, creating this feedback loop of noise. The problem becomes if I laugh while you guys are talking, or you laugh while I say something, or like we're all doing something at the same time. Zoom or one of these other programs that uses echo cancellation, it has to choose. Do I kill Matthew's mic, or do I kill the sound coming from Ray and Steve? And my experience has been 99 times out of 100, it chooses wrong. And so this is why earbuds can be so crucial to improving your recording quality, just so you can take off that echo cancellation, remove what they call ducking. That's when Zoom kind of picks what sound to record at any given time. They don't have to be expensive, right? Steve's got the fancy, classic radio cans on his head. Ray, I'm going to admonish you because I don't see anything in your ears. Tisk tisk. I've got a very simple in-ear monitor that I got off Amazon for $20, but honestly, it could be like a $5, set of earbuds you pick up at the gas station. Just something so that sound doesn't have to come out of your speakers, and your microphone and your software doesn't have to figure out what is the content I should be recording and what should I be muting, because you will not be happy with the results.
And Ray, I know you want to opine about why you're not wearing headphones or earbuds. I've admonished him for this as well, but there's a reason.
Yeah, no, I happen to have an ear condition at the moment, so I'm dealing with some health issues there. But but I have very fancy software that is currently dealing with this. But typically, I would have my monitors in, and so the goal for everyone is to, yes, wear your monitors. It's just going to be more helpful for you to be able to know what you're hearing. For example, in this circumstance, I can't tell whether or not there is background noise happening on Steve or Matthew's, mics, because I'm not monitored. I'm using software that is removing background noise so that they're not hearing it. No one's hearing it in the mic, but that means I don't know what's going on. So I am kind of flying blind, or I don't know what the appropriate metaphor
I don't know if the expression "flying deaf" is caught on yet, but maybe that's one that we should be using.
Hosting semi-informed. But the goal here is so that you can hear. So if you do hear like a tinny sound coming in the background of one of your guests or co-hosts, you can say, hey, by the way, that's happening. You can kind of send them a private message. They can work on those kinds of issues. You can't do that if you're not actually monitored, in the recording. So it is actually good to do. I'm hoping that as of next week, I should be able to put earbuds back in my ears, and I'll be very happy to do so, because I literally spend, I don't know, 90% of my days, I have some kind of headphones in, phone, podcast listening, just I'm talking on the phone, I'm in meetings, and I typically have headphones in. And so this right ear issue has been quite the annoying thing there. But anyway,
I hope it is resolved quickly then, and I apologize for admonishing you without knowing the medical history in the background. I will say we're talking about this as a virtual connection kind of a thing, but it's also important when you're recording in person.
Oh, yeah.
I sometimes, if I have two people recording in person, like as long as I'm monitoring it with headphones, I'm okay. But I still think it's good for the actual participants to be listening, because some people are very animated and they drift and they do this and they blah blah blah. And if you have headphones, then you'd be able to tell, like, oh, I'm no longer on mic anymore, I should stop doing that. But as long as someone's monitoring and making sure that things are happening, I'll usually be like, you don't have to wear the headphones. It's okay. Especially if people are worried about the aesthetics and the visual appeal.
I wanted to touch upon two things that you said, Matthew. I'll start with the last point that you just made about being off mic and moving around and being very animated and not really knowing where the microphone is. Ray, in many discussions that we have had over this book, is a big fan of headset microphones to solve the very issue that you are talking about. And let's say you're a host and you're doing a show about golf, and you want to be on the golf course and you're moving around. Either you're hitting, you're using your golf club and you're out hitting and walking and chatting with somebody. You're going to want a headset microphone. There's other ways to think about, solving that particular issue.
I agree. Headset microphones are a great way to go because, right, they free up your hands. You don't have to think about it, right? Everything is in one compact, little piece. The only problem I find with headset microphones is once until you spend like $200 to $300 on headset microphones, many of them are going to sound very flat, very tinny. you're not going to be very like that, because it's a headset microphone, because they've, minimized all the equipment in there to make them lightweight and fit and the form function and whatnot. Like, they can produce less than stellar sound. Audio Technica, the brand that we seem to be, promoting exclusively here on the show, they make a really good headset mic. I believe it's like a BHP or BP
I have
something.
recommended that one for
Yeah.
some clients.
It's
Yes.
about 250 to 300, but if you're thinking headset microphones, it's the way to go. Now that now that you have a headset mic, you do want to think, is it visually appealing? I don't know. It depends what you're doing, but you will see often lots and lots of sports announcers and broadcasters use headphone microphones like that, because they are typically more animated. They're jumping up and down, right? They're getting excited by what they are talking about.
Yeah, my
And
typical recommendation recently has been the Sennheiser broadcast headset. I think it's the HMD 300. I can't remember what the exact model is,
Look
but
it
it's
up.
just shy of about $400, and I feel like it gives you very good, ear coverage, especially if you're out in the field. But the microphone itself is high quality. It's going to pick up good audio. And I think that's a pretty good mic for you as well. And I'm not a big fan of the big,
The
ear cover.
cans.
Yeah, I'm just not a big fan of them myself personally, which is why I have smaller monitors that they go in and loop behind my ears, and they're clear, so they're just little buds that go in my ears, and I've always been very comfortable with those more than I snake them behind my. They actually run. You can't see
Like
this,
down
but
the
they
back of
run.
your shirt and everything like that.
Oh no, they
Real
run down and back
TV style.
my chair. Yeah, they run
Yeah.
through the chair and then they get plugged into the desk and then into the interface. And it's worked really well. I mean, it's just from my chest up that's being recorded, so I don't really care about the line being seen. Uh, anyway, but the goal for a lot of folks is that you're just getting really good audio, right? And even when you lean back and you're, animated, that's performative for us in the podcast. But typically, when businesses are trying to have a conversation with one another, they're not trying to get only part of the audio picked up, and that creates more editing. Problems for folks. It creates poor quality audio generally, and I find that headset microphones can be a good use case for a lot of podcasters who just don't do well seated, stationary, having a conversation. And so you get a good set of headset mics. You can give one to your guest. You can have one. You throw it into an interface, and now you're both capable of having a more. You can sit back in your chair. You can do those kinds of things, and it's a little bit more of a relax. You can push the microphone up when you're muted. Have a drink of water. Those kinds of things. It's a little bit less onerous for some folks, and it's a little bit more. I don't know. It just feels more intimate. I think when you're both hearing each other's audio, right? You're getting some of that in-head localization that we talk about in the book, and you get a little bit of that while you're in person, and I think that could be really useful as well. So I think there's some benefits for it. It's not for everybody, right? And this is where it comes down to you need to figure out what's going to be best for your podcast, what's going to best showcase you and your voice and your guests' voices to be able to do that well. So, Steve, where are we on to next?
well, I wanted to bring up one point that Matthew made about using Zoom and kind of segue into some of the different kinds of recording setups that you may need depending on how your show is going to be. So, one of the things that you said, I want to just expand on a bit and about Zoom. One of the problems with Zoom is that it is recording over the internet. And that can cause a whole set of problems for a business that wants to have the best possible sound that they can have. So in the book, we do talk about one particular recording, that you may be doing, recording multiple people via, remotely, like we are doing here. We say, we understand that Zoom is one way to do it. It's not our first recommendation, in part because it records over the internet, where there are a number of recording platforms that record locally on your computer. which makes a big difference. And if either one of you want to get into that for a second or two as to why that makes a difference and why we would recommend that over Zoom if you have the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that because I've spoken about this at length many times. So yeah, there are programs like Remotely and Boomcaster and Riverside and Squadcast, which is now owned by Descript, and those are basically double end recording software. So we both log into the same call, and what happens is, so if Ray and I were on that call, Ray's computer would be recording his audio and his video to his computer. My computer would be recording my audio, my video to my computer. And then when we're done, all that gets uploaded and whoever started the call like gets those clean files. The nice thing there is that there is typically not a lot of room for error between the input device and the computer itself when you're recording that way. Now, maybe while Ray and I are chatting, it doesn't sound great, right? Maybe our connection isn't awesome. And that can be frustrating. And for the streaming audience, right, that's not going to be fun. But at the end of the day, I will have clean local recordings that I can use later in post-production and get the product that I want. With Zoom, whoever is hitting record is recording what they hear coming over the internet. And so, yes, it can record separate tracks for each participant, but it's still separately coming over. So if Ray and I are, talking over Zoom and for some reason Ray's connection goes and he starts talking and every other word starts to drop out for a while, I am recording that conversation with every other word dropping out. There is no recoverable way to collect that audio. So yes, ideally a Remotely, a Boomcast or Riverside, like one of those is a great high quality solution for being able to capture really good, high quality, uninterrupted audio and video. That being said, these programs, many of which are browser based, can run into other issues that are completely out of your control. And especially when we are talking about businesses who are possibly talking to other businesses, a lot of things can go wrong. So I've worked with lots of clients who were interviewing guests and, corporate firewalls or corporate security measures made it so that Riverside couldn't work, or if it worked, it wasn't recording. And we didn't find that out until later, let's say. Or, somebody, we're talking to somebody who's using Chrome but has a plugin or an extension or something else going on in their computer that listen, to Riverside and Remotely's credit and all these people, like, they can't account for all these variables. They do a very good job, but there are just a lot of things that can happen that make it impossible to use one of those platforms. And as much as we want the highest quality content, right, the highest quality audio and video when we are producing content, a high quality conversation is still more important. And so I have often said to clients, start with Riverside. And if you run into issues or, if issues that you have last more than about a minute and a half, abandon the platform and go to Zoom. And the reason why I tell people to go to Zoom is because, one, most people, Zoom works, right? Corporate IT departments and, most of those places are comfortable with Zoom. It works on every system, right? It has its own standalone apps. So like everything about it, it's more reliable for actually creating a connection and being able to record what it is that you want to talk about. But also what you don't want, like, let's say, I'm planning a 45-minute conversation. In this case, Steve, you're going to be my guest this time. I'm planning a 45-minute conversation with Steve. We're set to go at 2:00. We're going to record for about an hour. But first, we got to spend 15 minutes messing around with Riverside. Well, by the time we get that all figured out and then we're ready to record, one, both of us are probably a little flustered. If Steve is a high-profile guest, an A-list celebrity, a CEO of a company, a Fortune 500 company, they're probably getting pretty annoyed. And so now, whether or not the audio and video fidelity of our conversation sounds great, the content and the tone of the conversation is going to quickly drop, right? Because nobody wants to hear a conversation between two people who are having a bad day. And so, I've said this 100 times, I would much rather get a great conversation recorded at okay to decent quality than a terrible, frustrated conversation and not all of it, right? Because we wasted so much time, right? Nobody wants a crappy conversation at high fidelity. Doesn't matter. So, I would say, yes, focus on the technology that is going to give you the best chance of having good sound, but it's okay to pivot and to sacrifice a little bit of quality to ensure that you have a good conversation. No one in the history of podcasting has ever said, I hate these guys. I hate what they say. I hate their content. I'm not a small business owner. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't want to start a podcast, but they look and sound so good. I'm going to listen anyway, right? Nobody does that, right? They stay because the content matters and because the time they spent listening or consuming this is valuable to them. So focus on the value you are providing at the best quality you can. But, if it can't be here, it's okay here if the quality and the content and the value is good.
I think you've read our book.
Maybe. or I wrote it and I'm just ghostwriter and just jumping in to pretend like I didn't.
It's funny though, because yes, we're on video right now, but the book is audio focused. And we have made that clear, very clear, that we are an audio focused, audio first for small businesses. And look, we're three guys. Who wants to look at us? I mean, let's face it.
Classic faces for podcasting
or radio and marketing.
So a couple things here to note. One is for folks who are doing just a solo podcast and are confused about some of these things, you can just use Zoom. Zoom has a restriction for free accounts that is basically you can only record to your computer. You can't record to the cloud anyway. But if you do have a paid Zoom account and you're just doing a solo show and you open up a meeting room and it's just you, hit record and you're going to be recording locally and it's going to be a local recording. There's no OTA.
I'll make it even easier. If you are doing this yourself, if all you're recording is your side of the conversation, right? You're just recording a monologue or a speech or, script. If you have a Mac, open up QuickTime. If you have a PC, there's a voice recorder app. They're free. They're already installed on your computer. Use those. And in fact, if you're recording on Zoom or recording on Riverside and your computer has the bandwidth and the resources, I would still open those up and record a backup copy of yourselves in those platforms if you can. Steve knows we used to have an engineer who worked with us back in the radio days. His whole thing was always 2 is 1 and 1 is none. So anything you can do to have a backup, anything you can do to ensure that if something fails, you have a catch-all is great. So if you are recording a conversation with someone and they are technologically savvy, say, hey, we're on Zoom, but do me a favor, open up QuickTime, hit record your audio, record your video. And if something happens with Zoom, at least you can send me that file. In some cases, that file is better, right? It's pristine, high quality, no processing, no nothing. So, I would say even before Zoom, you've already got free recording software available to you.
Yeah. And many of these platforms are doing some level of recording in some way, shape, or form. We're using a little bit of a fancier piece of software here. I'm getting local recordings of every single one of their voices, which is in the background, uploading their locally recorded audio in the background, whether they knew it or not. And then, we also are getting the recording that's the master over the air recording, the OTA recording, plus whatever's recording by YouTube or whatever on the live stream. So there's multiple recordings happening here, which is why I don't really mind. And, sometimes what you will do with guests is ask them to record into some other, tertiary recording on their local device as well. But Riverside and StreamYard and Streamlabs, all of these tools have these kinds of fail safes to be able to do what Matthew's talking about here. So you can kind of have some tools that do this, some tools that don't. But yes, in the solo recording, I absolutely agree with you, Matthew. You can easily just use one of the local recording, software, and they're going to do just fine for if you've got a good microphone and if you're in an environment that is not loud, you're gonna have a pretty good recording just from that. Let's talk about some of the pain points that folks experience. I know we just talked about equipment and some of those things. What are some of the big pain points that folks get overwhelmed with when they're trying to select equipment? And I know one of those things is probably the technical terms, right? LUFS and levels and hertz and all of these other terms that people kind of get I get them confused very frequently, and so or I just don't even know what they are. And so, I think it's important for us to kind of touch on maybe that a little bit in terms of how can people approach the technical jargon when it comes to podcasting.
I would say for the most part, you can do a lot of this without that technical jargon, without it impacting you in any way, shape, or form. Outside of dynamic microphone, there's not a lot of things about the microphone that individuals who are not audiophiles or who are not audio engineers are going to worry about, right? Like some microphones, they hit people with higher voices better. Some people respond to people with lower voice registers better. If you are thinking about that, if you are concerned with that, go to Guitar Center, go to a local music store, right? Go to the B&H in New York City and try them, right? Talk into these microphones and see what sounds better to you. But getting overwhelmed by the jargon and some of these other terms and some of the numbers that are thrown at you, again, is not going to do most people any good. So I would say, simple decisions. The one thing I will say why I think we kind of hit this golden age of podcasting in the last few years is because the hardware has become so simple, right? It started with the ATR 2100 and then the Samsung Q2, right? These USB enabled microphones with a headphone jack built into it that allow people to just start recording without having to worry about input and output signals. Then you start getting, handy digital recorders from Zoom, the H6, the H4, right? These are devices that allow you to plug 4 microphones into a device and hit record and you're ready to go. I've recorded countless episodes on an H6 and the quality is beautiful. It's almost sounds studio quality, even when we're in just someone's office or, in the lobby of a hotel talking during a podcasting conference. Then, Rode comes out with the Rodecaster, this big, beautiful audio board that allows you to plug in 4 microphones and connect your phone and connect the device via Bluetooth and, has the buttons on the sides. You can play sound effects and talk to people online and connect people with them in person. Like the technology has gotten to a place, all this hardware is coming out, makes it easy for people to get started with recording audio content. And even video, you're starting to get that aspect too, right? DJI makes a number of really good camera devices that just turn them on and hit record. Or Mevo makes this 3 to 4 camera system that we've used in the studio, right? Literally, you set these little cameras up, you have an iPad, you hit record, boom, it's recording 4 cameras for you. In like, yeah, if you want to, you can mess with the ISO and the white balance and the shutter speed. But for the most part, they've all got pretty good default settings or now AI involved where it's like, oh, I know what you're trying to get to. Let me, tweak things a little bit. We'll make it sound as good as possible. But, if you are going down a rabbit hole of, hertz and kilobits and sample rates and, channel in and outs and, all these different things, yeah, you're probably going to feel frustrated. Same thing, by the way, is going to happen with money, right? We're talking about an $80 microphone and someone's going to say $80 microphone, that's not going to be good enough. And so that person's going to recommend a $600 microphone. Great. You buy a $600 microphone. To you, it sounds a little better. Maybe because maybe that microphone is too good and now it's picking up all the things that are wrong with your sound setting. But what happens is you buy an expensive microphone, you buy expensive cameras, you buy all this expensive equipment. Next thing you know, you're in the hole $6,000 to $10,000. You haven't even recorded anything. You haven't published anything. And when you start to do that and you're not getting a ton of response, right? You're not getting downloads or engagement. Your frustration is accelerated by the amount of money you spent that you feel like is completely going to waste. And that makes you more likely to not perform well when the mic does turn on, makes you less likely to stay consistent with it. And it's what leads to a lot of people quitting and giving up on this. So, I'm all about keeping it simple, keeping it low budget. I've always said when I talk to clients, I'd much rather you have a product that gets better than a product where you are creating disappointment. And so if you start off with a Samsung Q2 microphone and you do it and you put out 30 episodes and you're putting out good content, The audience is like, man, this is great. And you're like, thanks, audience. I'm going to invest in a better microphone. Now your audience is like, cool, we're excited. Like what we already love is only going to get better. And like people are gonna be excited for you. They're gonna join you for the ride as this gets better. On the other hand, if you're one of these podcasters who's like, all right, we spend $10,000 on the studio, we're going to do an episode every single day, you've set expectations here. And then when you quickly find out that, well, we don't know how to use half this equipment, so we're just going to use our iPhone. Oh, and by the way, daily is exhausting, so we're going to back this down to 3 days. You've created a sense of disappointment. And once you've done that, it's hard to turn that around. It's hard to get it back. You really only get one chance to make a good impression with your audience. And with there being so much content out there, it's not like they're going to be like, hey, I'll, thanks, Ray. This was pretty good. I'm going to go check out these guys. I'll come back in a little bit. They're not coming back. So focus on what works, what allows you to put out good, valuable content, and know that there's always room to get better. You can always invest more. You can always take your success and build upon it. And then go back and look at the beginning and be like, man, that was pretty terrible in the beginning, but look at where we are today, right? Any successful product, right? Or, behind me is the Simpsons TV guides. This is from like late 90s. Today, the Simpsons is obviously like this crystal high def animated, gorgeous, blah, blah, blah. If you go back and watch the first few seasons, it looks terrible. It's garbage. But it worked because the content was good. It created value. It gave people something interesting. And we didn't get upset when, it got better. So it's okay to start small and get better. That's, your small business. You know that better than anybody else.
I wanted to just point out one very important piece here, which is that when you put your podcast episode out there via your RSS feed, it is being picked up by a bunch of other technology, right? It's being served to servers. Those servers are holding the data. The data is then being downloaded to a bunch of devices, and those devices then have their own apps that play the audio. And most often than not, I am not, as a listener, I'm not hearing the audio you recorded. I'm hearing the audio that the player is playing to me. And many times that's trimming silence. Many times that is adjusting levels to amplify the audio in the earbuds or the headsets that I'm wearing. I'm typically listening to you in 2x, sometimes 3x, because no offense, but that's just what I do. And so remember that what you're putting out is not what somebody is necessarily hearing. And so all of that work that you may be putting into every second of the audio sounding the way you wanted it to is not necessarily the way it's going to be consumed. And so you've got to satisfy with the best you can do. I analogize this to email. I had a client who spent countless hours and so much money crafting email, the template, so that the email marketing would go out looking exactly the way that this person wanted it to. And then I had to be the bearer of bad news that most of their email was being read in plain text email. And so, the most of their audience just wanted plain text email. They didn't care about any of the design. They saw no images. They saw no layout. They just saw text. And your email is read in the format in which your email software, the recipient, dictates, not the way in which you dictate it. And so that's just the way podcasting is in some ways as well. So just be mindful of that. Just don't get too wrapped around the axle when it comes to, controlling every little bit of it. It's different if you were NPR, right? It would be different if you were, crafting a fiction style podcast and you want to make sure every possible little audio element means something in the narrative. That's not what we're trying to do here. So I will say there are a couple of pieces of technical jargon that we should be aware of, right? Like you should know what a microphone is. You should know what a headset is or headphones are. And but there are some things that we should also know, like a microphone arm, just a boom arm, so that that's the thing holding the microphone, right? As Matthew is demonstrating, right? You want to be able to have one of those. You probably want a shock mount of some kind if you're leveling up from basically baseline to not. And again, Matthew is demonstrating his there. And shock mount basically means when you tap your desk or move the microphone, it's not going to pick up the audio from it because it's basically on a bunch of bungee cords, typically bungee cords, sometimes a spring. And then finally, a pop filter or a windscreen so that plosives, basically P's and T's and so on and so forth, as Steve is pointing to, you can't see this in the podcast, audio podcast, but there are these little coverings, so that if wind blows across it, or if you have really strong T's or P's or those kinds of plosives that come out of your mouth when you're speaking, it's gonna lessen the impact on really any kind of microphone, whether dynamic or condenser. Obviously, we would recommend dynamic anyway. But some of those technology terms are in the book, and I think they're important. Beyond that, some of these more technical elements, as Matthew noted, like most microphones are going to be just fine. They're just going to be just fine. So don't get worried about those things. Really worry about the hardware, if anything, not necessarily these technical terms around them. You should have the things that are going to work for you.
If you see a button on your microphone that you're not sure what it does, just leave it alone. You'll be fine.
I have been there. I have been there.
And one thing I wanted to bring up, which we haven't brought up yet, to help alleviate some of these issues with perhaps the reverberations of your walls where you're recording, your recording environment. Let's talk about that for a minute, because that can matter. If you have an $80 microphone, you do a few things that'll sound like a $600 microphone, depending on what you do with the recording environment where you are. Also, think about too noisy distractions like your HVAC. Maybe that needs to be off because that's going to be really loud in the background. Silly little things like wearing too much jewelry and you're dangling jewelry. Your mic, even if it's a dynamic microphone, could be picking that up. I know it sounds silly, but try to think about things like that, or tapping your desk.
It sounds sillier in the audio if you have it.
Yes.
You don't hear it, and then you're listening later, you're like, what is that? I can't figure out what it's so distracting.
In my first podcast ever, my first podcast, this is probably 08, 09, before I started really publishing them out to the world, I had a boiler in my apartment. And it would knock like every about 45 minutes or so. And so I had to record my episodes in between the boiler turning on. And I didn't know that until I'd recorded like the first 5 or 6 episodes. And then I went to edit and I was like, what is that knocking? And then I realized that I had my headphones on and didn't realize that they were not monitoring my voice. They were just picking up the recording, and I wasn't hearing anything. I wasn't monitoring myself. They were just headphones. And I did not know what I was doing back then. And then I got all of a sudden this knocking, and I was like, okay, well now I need to re-record, because there was no way for me to remove the knocking from the audio at the time. So be very mindful of those kinds of things.
And be
Absolutely.
mindful. I was going to say, just be mindful of actually, the time you record. If you're in an office and you know that 2:00 in the afternoon is an incredibly busy time in your office, don't record then, because the chances of you picking up the noise are much greater, assuming that you, of course, don't want that noise in the background. But yeah, the time of day could matter. Also, where in your office you're recording can matter. And I know, Matthew, you've created recording studios, but just quickly, a couple of big tips for those who might be recording in an office, what they need to do to help get better sound.
A few things to think about. One, glass. Glass is terrible for audio because sound reflects off it. And oftentimes people want to build a studio like, well, we want people to see inside. It looks very cool. It's like, yeah, it does look very cool. But when you see glass in broadcast booths and television studios, radio studios, things like that, it's like double layered glass so that sound coming from the outside doesn't leak in through the glass. It's also angled in a certain way so that the sound isn't bouncing back at you. But if you just have one of these beautiful glass, boardrooms, you're creating a ton of echo, a ton of reverb. You're not going to be happy. In general, hard surfaces in general, right? Hardwood tables are going to create a lot of reverb. Hard walls are going to create a lot of reverb. Square rooms, right? Rooms that are just, pure block shaped are going to create some issues. All these things can be mitigated. So carpeting is great. We use a lot of window curtains, window shades, moving blankets can be great. I think you point out in the book, Steve, you record your good microphone, your good recording setup is in your closet with all your clothes. Clothes are fantastic for creating a good sound because it absorbs sound, right? So the two things that you really want to think about when you are, I'm not going to say soundproofing because most of you will not be able to soundproof a room. In fact, most people in the world have never experienced a true soundproofed room. It's not as common as it sounds. What you are really dealing with is a sound treated room. And so, for good sound treatment, there are two things you want to do. One is you want to avoid anything that's going to reflect sound back at you. So, if you can angle things down or up, kind of away from where you are, and not create these angles, but you also want to absorb that sound. So, what you'll often see is like foam that kind of looks like egg carton foam put up on the walls. You will often see another good one I've seen a lot of people do is they take drop panel seal, the panels that you put in your drop ceiling, and maybe you cover it with a t-shirt or something like that to put some aesthetic, but you can put some of those on the wall to kind of absorb the sound. Again, moving curtains, blankets, um, carpets, right? Rugs, anything soft, anything that, when you make a noise by it, you snap, you don't hear the echo of your snap is going to improve. Again, dynamic microphones, ones that you can be close to are going to really be a savior. But yeah, avoid glass, avoid a lot of hard surfaces, and avoid just, spaces that create a natural echo whenever you make some sound in them.
All right, we are coming up on our time. So,
Oh my gosh.
Steve, is there anything else that you wanted to cover in today's episode? And we can get some final thoughts from Matthew as well. And then we can start our process of winding ourselves down in this episode.
I think because we are coming to the end, Matthew, just a quick takeaway from you as to what you think is most important when it comes to the recording setup and the podcasting gear.
The most important thing is respect your audience. And that is twofold. One, more important than how good you sound is respect their time. You can be, like I said, you can have the best quality sound in the world, but if you're a business podcast and you spend the first 20 minutes talking about your cats, you're not creating value. You're wasting your listeners' time. And so make sure that when people are coming to your show, you tell them this is the value we're going to give you, and then give them that value. And in the same vein, common sense. If you listen to recording and you're straining and you're like, or you hear a lot of background noise and you don't come through prominently and clearly at the forefront, it's not working, right? So just a few small tweaks, right? Just distraction-free, clear audio, and clear video is what you're aiming for. A lot of things that we're talking about are easy to figure out, easy to find on YouTube. Great. All these resources are in the book as well that you can check out and learn from. But just be considerate and thoughtful of your listeners, both, the time that they are giving you and the experience that they're going to have doing so. And you won't go wrong that way.
And from my end, I'll just say, you know what? Doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. Great content, smart, simple choices will take you a long way. Start with what you need. Focus on sounding clear and consistent, and upgrade only when your podcast earns it. So think of it from that perspective.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Matthew, for joining us here on the episode. In the show notes, we're going to have links to Matthew and his work, so feel free to go ahead and utilize those links to find him wherever he might be. And again, Matthew Passy, thank you for joining us here on our companion podcast to Podcasting for Small Business.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right. So everyone, in our next episode, we're going to be tackling chapter 8, which is all about post-production. So we're going to be moving from this kind of production piece. I'm sure we're going to still talk about some of the technology and some of the hardware and some of those pieces, but we want to really move our way along in the series and start talking about what you need to do once you've recorded the actual episode. As Matthew noted, listening back to your episodes is really important. So we're going to talk a little bit about that quite a bit about that actually in our next episode. And that way you can follow along with us in the book, Podcasting for Small Business, The Essential Blueprint to Launch Your Podcast. I'm Ray Sidney Smith with my co-author, Steve Orr. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.